you tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it across to Konrad and tell us a bit about yourself, Konrad.
Good on you, Glenn. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining in. I'm going to apologise in advance for the croaky throat. I've been shaking off a bit of a post-viral thing for the last couple of weeks, but hopefully it won't be too interruptive. Also aware that I'm coming to you from North Queensland, where broadband might not be as strong as it is in the metropolitan areas. So please, if the signal is breaking up and you are missing things, just raise something in the chat box. But as Glenn mentioned, that the recording will be available afterwards if there's anything that anybody has missed out. So I consider myself relatively new in this game to what a lot of you guys have been doing. I know that many of you have been supervisors for 20, 30 or more years. I've been a supervisor now for about the last sort of 7 years. It wasn't long after my fellowship that our practice sort of gave me the default job of looking after the other registrars coming through. But nonetheless, over the last couple of years, I was fortunate enough to be acting in a medical educator position, just doing support for supervisors. I was lucky enough to share that with Nick, who's online with us tonight as well. But as I said, I'm in Queensland, up in Proserpine, Early Beach in the Whitsundays, beautiful part of the world. So any of you who are shivering through a cold southern winter, please feel free to come on up and visit us. What we're hoping to get through tonight is we're going to hopefully help you understand the potential causes of difficulty for registrars. We want you to know how to identify signs of difficulty for them. But you have an idea about what measures to put into place to address these issues with your registrar. And then, of course, knowing when, how and why to escalate or refer those concerns on to others as appropriate. I'm certainly going to be moving through pretty quickly. We've got a lot of material, but definitely we'll be watching the questions as they're coming through. So we're just going to start off with a simple poll question of, have you ever identified or supported a registrar at risk? Absolutely, absolutely. And look, that's probably about where we would anticipate things to be. We'd certainly be thinking that 70% of you have said yes, you have been in this position before, and nearly 30% of you are saying that you've been fortunate enough to not be in this situation. So for those who have, we're going to be keen to hear your experiences and insights as we go. And for those who fortunately haven't been in this situation yet, hopefully you'll feel a little bit more prepared when it does arise than those of us who've been there before. So you've got to think about where a registrar has come from by the time that you actually get them in your general practice. Remember that for many of them, this is actually their first real independent job, that they've been through all these years of schooling, excelling, as they went. They've put in the hard slog through university. They've now had a very structured time in the hospital setting where they've very much been subservient and being told very directly about what their roles and responsibilities are. And then they do take that big step of deciding, okay, which vocational training pathway do I want to go down to? And before you know it, they've fallen on your doorstep in your general practice. So always good to just think about, where they're at. And it's a little bit, different in medicine, that we have this delayed maturity, where if you were talking about somebody who's gone and done an apprenticeship as a electrician or a carpenter, they might be fully qualified by 21 and actually be operating a small business themselves by the time they're 23 or 24. Whereas it's not at all unusual for a junior doctor to be at 25, 26, daunted by the thought of having to apply for jobs and going and doing interviews and things like that. So always important to think a little bit about that background of where your registrars are coming to you from. And it's not surprising that a lot of the time that they come in, and you see it yourself, when they start their first term, they're just holding on for grim life. They've got no idea what they've got themselves into. They've got a whole lot of generic skills. They've got a vast amount of knowledge that they don't really know if it's applicable or not to the setting that they've come themselves in for, but they're really just hoping that they can get themselves through that first day, that first week, that first term without killing anybody or doing any harm. So just remember, you know, they're fearful. They really are frightened about what they're coming into. So it's not at all surprising that they're going to really go through quite a bit of a culture shock in that first term. And we're now halfway through the first term for 2016. There's a lot of these issues which may have already been addressed in your practices and with your registrars, but nonetheless, you know, as I said, you've got to think about that transition from a hospital resident to now being a GP registrar. That means that they're no longer in that closely supervised team setting of consultant, registrar, resident, where they've always slotted comfortably into. They've often been allocated to a particular term. They might have been doing O&G or psych or doing, you know, peds, and so the clinics that they're seeing are quite structured. They know generally what type of patients they've got coming in. All of a sudden they're in general practice land and they've got a variety of different patient presentations, and most importantly, they've got no idea what the next presentation is going to be either. It's not just the variety. This is also, for many of them, the very first time that they're no longer on a structured salary. And although we do have the national terms and conditions, which we do endorse wholeheartedly and hope that everybody's adhering with, you know, there are certainly very many registrars for whom their fee or their income is directly related to the amount of activity that they're performing. So fee for service is a big change for registrars to go through as well. When we've been in private practice for some time, we love our consulting room. This is our little haven. We love the intimacy and the personal space that it gives us to share with the patients. But for a new registrar, it's a really daunting place to be. They don't have the comfort of a colleague just on the other side of the curtain, or they're not surrounded by their supervisors every time that they're seeing a patient. So that's another issue there that we're always having to be mindful of. And then, of course, there's just the straight out logistic issues that now they've got a new workplace and a new boss. That boss may or may not be the supervisor who they're relying on to take them through each day and each week. It might be somebody who they never actually get to meet. So that's daunting for a lot of registrars as well. And particularly for those who are going and doing their rural term, you'll often find that this means that they've now got a lot of dislocation from the support structures, the home, the family networks that they've been holding dear for all their lives. So great to just be mindful about these things before the registrar has even seen their first patient, of what's going through their mind. Now, as supervisors, we probably still most commonly anticipate that the main areas of registrar difficulties are going to come in the areas of clinical skills or knowledge. And look, that's probably historical. The big difference that we see with that is that registrar applications and acceptance into the AGPT program is certainly much more competitive than it was. And we've now moved away from anybody who applies for general practice training is being accepted into it. So now you get a state where you know, if they actually get onto the program at all, you might find that regional training providers are omitting those sort of, you know, band 9 or even band 8 registrars from their intake, so that you are generally finding on the whole that the registrars coming into the training program are certainly more knowledgeable, probably a little bit more mature and a bit more experienced, but nonetheless, you know, this is still a common area of concern that we often come across. One thing which certainly hasn't changed and always is a recurring issue that we do see for registrars when they're struggling in their placement might be communication difficulties. There's a whole barrage of reasons why communication difficulties arise, and of course we do have to be particularly wary of those when we do have registrars and supervisors who may come from different cultural backgrounds. But we've also got personality differences. We may also have different strengths or styles of communication and learning which are different from ourselves to our registrars, or from our previous registrar to the one we've got now. So it's always important to be a little bit aware of those potential causes that might arise. Another possible area of registrar difficulty is just personal difficulties. And it's going to be very difficult sometimes for the registrar, particularly when they're new in the term and they haven't really worked out their place in the bigger practice or the big team, of just where they actually sit. How far can they go with their supervisor? What are the boundaries that they can explore? So you may find that your registrar, at least initially, is very reluctant to address these with the supervisor. And although we may always try to come across as comforting and as friendly as we can be, there is never any question that there remains a very significant power imbalance between ourselves as a supervisor and the registrar, and we should never really let that drift from our minds in any time that we're interacting with the registrar, particularly in terms of patients or peers. Another area which commonly comes up and sadly gets omitted or hidden so often is the issue of illness in the registrar. Registrars should never feel as though they have to hide an illness from their supervisor, but more importantly, we would hope that the registrar themselves has their own GP who they can go and see and trust and be honest with, and know that they've got confidential care in that setting. If that's somebody within the practice, or that's somebody in another practice in town, that's fantastic. If that's a GP who's back in their hometown, great. But always make sure that your registrar is not left having to self-manage or self-diagnose, or even worse, hide a condition, because we know from the studies, and there was a big one undertaken by Beyond Blue a couple of years ago that showed that junior doctors are at massively increased risk of mental illness. And unfortunately, our profession is very overrepresented in suicide and mental illness areas. So it is very important that if the registrar is all of a sudden seeming as though they might not be just going as well as they could be, think, are they actually got themselves a GP? Are they making sure that somebody's actually looking after these areas for them? So we can, sort of broadly clump these areas into the 4 Ps. And I'm not a big fan of acronyms. I really hate these sort of, jingoistic abbreviations. But nonetheless, if we think about personal factors like, health issues, relationship problems, a new addition to the family, professional conduct, and we're going to visit these early warning signs in a moment, practice issues. So it might be as simple as what happens with workload. They might be struggling with using the telephone system or the IT. They might be having a clash with other team members in the staff there as well. And of course, although we shouldn't be seeing as many performance weaknesses as we once upon a time did, of course, it does remain a significant concern, which we're always aware of. And Marissa, that's absolutely right. That we need to be leading by example on having our own GPs. So we're going to just do another quick question around, and thinking about your most recent encounter with a registrar at risk, what do you think that the underlying cause for that might have been? We'll open that up to questions now. So we're seeing a pretty even spread there, and certainly performance weaknesses is still a significant issue, and I'm not for a second trivialising that or pretending that it doesn't happen. It most certainly does still happen. But absolutely right that we see close to half of you identifying that personal issues for the registrar have been the major thing, and that is something which I'm really hoping that from tonight we're all a little bit more aware and can manage perhaps those issues a little bit more sensitively and appropriately. So yeah, we'll move on there and see if we can explore those a little bit further. So Often, once again, as supervisors, it certainly is our natural reaction and our natural response that we would think that, okay, well, if we haven't heard anything to the contrary, it must be that the registrar is doing okay. You know, look, silence may be golden, but no news is good news as well. And sadly, that's not always the way. You know, we know that uncertainty, and we know that particularly if the registrar is struggling to voice their concerns, or that there hasn't been anything which has been raised, it doesn't really always mean that everything's going along smoothly. And it's also important that we make sure that we're getting active feedback often, and that we're actually, you know, taking note of that. Feedback means nothing if it's not actually being acted upon. And so of course it's most important that we're getting the feedback from the registrar themselves. They're the one who's at the key, at the center of this whole concern. That's the person who we need to be listening to, and they need to know that they're being listened to as well when they're asking for help or for advice. But of course there are so many other important sources of feedback that we need to be taking heed of and listening to as well. And it's constantly going to be the case that staff and patients are going to be sharing a completely different perspective on your registrar to what you're seeing yourself as the supervisor. You're also going to get other peer advice as well. You may have other colleagues in the practice, or ECT visitors, or the medical educator, who are all going to be able to share their concerns, or provide some extra feedback there as well. And of course the regional training organisation might have some prior information or some background which they're able to share there as well, particularly if, you know, we're talking about a remediation term or something like that, where some extra support may actually be required. But the big one that we've really got to make sure of is that we can't go along thinking that everything's okay and then have a critical incident blow up in our face and then say, crap, where did that come from? You know, it's so often the case that these things just seem to come totally out of the blue, and they shock and surprise everybody around them, excepting of course the registrar themselves. You know, when the registrar can do an honest feedback and an honest appraisal of the circumstances of the situation, often they're going to say, you know, I've been struggling for a while, and that's where it's so important that we might be able to be aware of where the early warning signs for that area, you know, maybe actually coming from. So let's have a look at where, you know, some of these might be, because if we're going to try to help educate you a little bit on what those earlier warning signs might be, so that you are aware of them perhaps a little bit earlier than waiting just for that final crisis to hit. Because it's this isn't just something which, you know, we're doing, as I said, although the registrar themselves is so very important, we need to make sure that they're taken care of. We need to understand that if they're actually struggling over a long period of time, that, you know, that rubs off on the colleagues, you know, and the whole practice. In fact, all of the staff are going to be struggling with that. But the bigger issue always is that this is going to potentially affect the welfare of your patients, and that's really the safety for whose this whole expedition is so very paramount. And Graham, that's absolutely right. That random review is really a useful tool, and I'm so glad that you've raised that tool, because it's something which I certainly use, and I'll show you how we incorporate that shortly. So let's have a look through some of these early warning signs. And these are taken from some work which was done in Oxford. Now, please don't start trying to take notes about all of this. All of these this information is included in the Registrar and Difficulty Guide, which Glenn referred to earlier, and which you can find in the little documents folder at the bottom right corner of the screen. It'll download into a PDF format. So please do that, download that, and peruse that later at your leisure. So let's have a look at some of these early warning signs. There's the group that we call the disappearing act, where your registrar might not be answering calls or messages, and they're often you know, on leave, sick leave, just absent, and not really explaining or understanding what's going on with that. A low work rate, that they might be struggling to get through procedures, that often at the end of the day they've still got 45 minutes worth of patient notes because they weren't keeping up with them as the day was going on. They've got a big backlog of letters and things that they need to go through. Every day they're in there before you are, and they're still finishing up when you're ready to leave, and they're still seeming to struggle with the workload. You might find that they're getting irritable, or that they're seeming that there's persecutory things, or having outbursts when there doesn't seem to be too much of an issue that is obvious to anybody else, and particularly if they're starting to find things being taken personally as well in that area. Chris, that's a concern if the registrar gets into that practice. We certainly encourage registrars as a whole to be making sure they're keeping up with their patient notes as they're going. Some of our other early warning signs certainly of rigidity in their conduct or behaviour. So they might not be able to tolerate ambiguity or clinical uncertainty all that well. They might not be compromising. They might not actually be listening to the patient and negotiating outcomes with the patient or with colleagues or yourself all that well. Your registrar might be struggling to prioritise the tasks that they've got going on, and you might find that they're actually, raising alarms about behaviour or about other conduct that is to you actually completely reasonable. So that's always a concern. Some of the more subtle ones, something like bypass syndrome, where you're finding that other staff or even students or your nurses are coming and seeing you about what's happening with that registrar's patients rather than discussing them with the registrar themselves. And something which we always have to be concerned about is if your registrar really is lacking in insight into what's going on. They're becoming very defensive about comments which you're making. That they're not really taking constructive criticism on board, or that they're arguing and counter challenging you on everything which you've been suggesting. A couple of final ones there to look at as well. Career problems, that they might be really struggling with exams. They might be looking at resitting, or they may have failed in the past. They might just be not certain that the general practice is actually for them, or that in fact this career in medicine is still where they really want to be. And often you'll find that, particularly after they've had a couple of suboptimal patient outcomes, that often you will find that personal isolation of a registrar's first term or first year really can be a turning point for them, and make sure that you're supporting them and helping them out through that time. We definitely have to be worried about the registrar who doesn't seem to be engaging in their own educational conduct as they're going through, and so it might be that they're not actually wanting to have their feedback session with you or getting appraisals, that they're particularly avoiding getting into that setting, that they're not completing their updates or their portfolios, and they're really avoiding reflection. And sometimes, particularly as Graham mentions there, if you're going back to prior supervisors or to referees, you might actually be finding that this has actually been an ongoing trait. The medical educator might be ringing you after the third planned teaching session saying, hey, we haven't seen your registrar. They're saying that they've got too much work going on, and you've actually been allocating them plenty of time to be able to get through that. And what we're saying with whistleblowing is that are they seeming to be dobbing on others a lot? Are they wanting to maybe elevate or increase their own self-worth or their self-value by saying that there's problems in the way that other people are going about their conduct? So it might be that they're just not perceiving their own weaknesses, or it might be that they're actually looking for weaknesses in others to perhaps try to reinforce their own conduct or their own behaviour, or in fact to divert attention away from their shortcomings there as well. So I'm not certain that I've answered that effectively there for you, Anna, but nonetheless, that's sort of my interpretation on that topic. So as I said, that we might be seeing that they're not really engaging, and so they might not be engaging in their educational progress, but we might also be finding that they're not really engaging professionally as well, that they might be withdrawing from challenging. So it's one thing to be, doing inappropriate whistleblowing or looking for problems where they're not really there, but it's another thing to be just going along with everything which is said and not actually challenging or questioning or asking for further clarification about issues there as well. And the concern there particularly is if they're then not bringing things to your attention, if where actually they should be asking questions and getting some clarification about patient management decisions, or if somebody else has made a decision that they're reluctant to go and question or find out more about. And then finally, we mentioned that sometimes we might find that there are actually. And then finally, we mentioned that sometimes we might find that there are actually strong attitudinal or personality issues which have been present there for a long period of time. And you may find that you may have a registrar who has really struggled with having a female supervisor, or your registrar may come from a background where they've always been encouraged to never question the authority of the supervisor in charge and what they should actually be saying. So very important through an effective orientation process to be making sure that you're getting an idea of all these, but more importantly, watching for them. Because as I said, when a crisis does actually hit, more often than not, you can actually flick back through some of these early warning signs and see, yeah, I think there might have actually been something that's been going on there for a while. And yeah, look, that tardiness certainly is an issue. And I take on board the concern about the patient notes aren't always done immediately after the consultation, and that may be appropriate in some practices. But really, when you're seeing registrars who have got an inbox which is piling up and piling up, you do need to ask them about, hey, look, what's actually going on with this. And Paul, you're absolutely right that often, because the receptionist is not only seeing the registrar, but the receptionist is seeing the patients when they're coming out from that registrar consultation as well. And that's an important insight which we should never be omitting. So how do we actually decide what we're going to do? None of us are mean. We're all supervisors because we're good people who have got the altruism of the profession at heart. We want to help our registrars. We want them to thrive and succeed in this business and in this vocation. We want them to love it as much as we have. So we're inherently reluctant to actually offend the registrar. So sometimes what we actually find is that supervisors just don't always have the skills necessary to be able to actually raise their concerns with the registrar or to put some constructive measures in place to try to help them out with it. And it might also be that we're only going on what we perceive as being an incomplete background knowledge of the events of what's actually been going on, and we really don't want to be going in there not without the full picture if there's going to be potential offence or consequences that arise from that. The other side of that, unfortunately, is that if we don't do anything, we know that these events and these problems can most definitely still lead to poor outcomes in patient safety. And clinical error, as we know, is an area which sadly accounts for tens of thousands of preventable deaths worldwide every year. And it's certainly been estimated that in Australia alone, clinical errors, they account for nearly $1 billion worth of unnecessary healthcare expenditure each year. And if we can make sure that our registrars or all of our healthcare professionals are working to their optimum and being able to undertake the best care of our patients all the time, we're certainly going to be seeing better outcomes in all of these areas. So when is it no longer a choice about what you're going to actually do? And remember that we do have obligations under the Health Professional Regulation Act that we have to act under mandatory notification requirements. So I'm sure that you're all aware of the times that we have to notify APRA or or the Office of the Health Ombudsman, but certainly if we have reasonable belief that a health practitioner has behaved in a way that constitutes notifiable conduct in relation to the practice of their profession, and that relates to somebody, a doctor who is practicing while intoxicated by alcohol or drugs, sexual misconduct in the practice of the profession, placing the public at risk of substantial harm because of an impairment or health issue, or significant departure from accepted professional standards that therefore may place the public at risk. So these are absolute, not just red flags. These are things that you don't actually have a choice about. If you see these in your registrar, sorry, we've got to go ahead and act. And as the supervisor, that's the ones who we actually have to do something about that. So, time for another poll question. For those of you who have managed a difficulty, to what level did you have to escalate those concerns? Did you manage it at the practice level alone? Was it something that you had to raise with the local medical educator or the training organisation, or did you in fact take it to the colleges or all the way to APRA? So not surprising that not too many of us haven't had to go all the way up to APRA stage. And look, I haven't made a notification of concern to RACGP or to ACRM, but I know that particularly in the new training environment, they are wanting to be more involved, and particularly if they've got registrars who are failing exams, they want to be knowing about why. So there are certainly college mechanisms that do require this, but it is of course, and expected that 3/4 of supervisors who've needed help with this have taken it to the training organisation or to the medical educator to help out with. So yeah, glad to see that those who have actually had to do something have felt like they've known how to actually go about it to that stage. And Tim, I'm glad to see that you're feeling liberated tonight. But it is always an issue that that if they have come out of general practice, look, we know that there are plenty of good specialists who start their qualifications off with FRACGP. We know that there are plenty of generalists who've gone and done an anaesthetic term, and the anaesthetists have said, hey, come and do anaesthetic training. So it may be that there is a two-way flow there. And look, it's human nature. We certainly don't want people to be remaining in general practice if they don't want to be here. But it definitely is probably more often that you'll get registrars coming the other way from specialist training, still seeing GP as the default or the easy option to come back to. All right. So, how do we actually go about addressing areas of difficulty? Now, the important thing here is that this is our job, all right? This is not something which you can leave with a practice manager, or if you're not the practice principal, that you can leave it with the practice principal. You're the supervisor. Others can raise concerns to you, but you can't actually delegate dealing with this to somebody else, okay? Sorry, there's no easy way around that. This is part of the job. As I've mentioned already, please avoid delaying the intervention. And we know already that feedback is most useful when it's actually given in a timely fashion. And ideally, that's actually then going to give the registrar an opportunity to make change and to implement some constructive changes. And as I've said also, that this is our responsibility to deal with. Please never assume that somebody else is going to step in and do something about it instead. It's not really the job of the training organizer, the training organisation, or an ECT visitor to be picking up on these issues and raising them. It's not fair of us to just want to get somebody through their term and then leave it to the next term or the next supervisor to deal with. And heaven forbid any of us would be thinking, oh, well, it can't be too bad because I haven't had a letter come from the Medical Defence Organisation or from APRA saying that there's a concern. And Paul, you're right that putting your head in the sand and just not being a good supervisor is sadly one of the areas where we might not realise that there's an issue there ourselves. So it's not always the registrar's fault that the supervisor doesn't want to know about these things and wanting to do something about it. So when we're actually having to do the intervention and to then go and speak to the registrar about it, there are certainly some golden rules, and this is all explored in far greater depth in the guide which I've already referred to. But the really simple basic principles that we must not lose: maintain the confidentiality of the registrar, remain honest, realistic, and objective in what you're talking about with them and the concerns that you've got. Don't rush to early judgment. Please hold off on judgment, particularly in the early stages. Make sure that you get more than one source of information to base the concerns on. Although you're the one who's bringing the concerns to the registrar, it's also your role to provide support to the registrar, because they are going to feel isolated and vulnerable at this time. Set some achievable, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely goals for the registrar on the changes and the interventions which can be done, and make sure that you document everything, because if this does all go bad and does go wrong, it's so important for yourself and for the registrar that the path that leading up to this event is well documented, that everybody is aware of it. Okay, you don't have to share the documentation with anybody, particularly in that early stage, but it does have to be actually done on what's actually going on. And look, yeah, if the registrar says no to passing on the issues, there are other mechanisms of support there as well. We would certainly be encouraging them to speak to their registrar liaison officer through their regional training organisation. GPRA are able to give them some extra support there as well. So if they feel as though this is a broader issue that they don't want brought on, and if they're actually having a conflict with their training provider themselves, then that's certainly something which you can't ignore. You know, we have to be able to make sure that the training provider and the registrar have to be able to communicate. We can't be providing this barrier if there's actually important issues which need to be raised. So we're going to actually just do a brief run through and see, we're just going to put ourselves into the position of what a supervisor dealing with this might be. So we've got a hypothetical training practice down on the Sunshine Coast. I don't know if I've got any colleagues from down that way tonight, but it's not a real practice. AgPal accredited. There's two full-time well-experienced GPs practicing there, yourself being the supervisor. It's a mixed billing practice, getting by on $65 for a standard consult. You've been taking registrars there for several years now. You've usually got medical students around as well, and most often they've actually been more advanced term registrars who you've had coming through, and you're very diligent in making sure that every Wednesday afternoon some time is put aside for the registrar to get their teaching. So hopefully this is quite realistic to most of the participants on board tonight. So tonight we've got a hypothetical registrar, a delightful young lady named Alice. She's fourth year out of university, 27 years old. She's in the first year of her FRAC GP pathway, so she's been brave enough to take on her rural placement at the Sunshine Coast first up. She's been raised and graduated in Sydney, where she did her resident training years, and she's delighted that she managed to get engaged before she left New South Wales. So she's now busily looking forward to getting married to the man of her dreams in October. All of her family still live in northern New South Wales, who she's still very close to. So she's going to be up here with you for the whole of this year, doing her GPT-1 and her GPT-2 issues. So we're just looking through a little bit of multi-source feedback about the registrar, and that the patients really do seem to be, on the whole, absolutely delighted with her. She's an absolutely lovely young lass. Some of your regular patients have said to you. She's very thorough in how she goes through, particularly with the kids. But some of your more regular patients have noticed she's still very shy. She doesn't seem very confident in herself all the time. She's very nice, but she actually hadn't heard of my medication. Some of your staff have actually started to notice that it's sometimes a little bit hard to get hold of Alice, particularly during the lunch hours. And your receptionist was a little bit concerned that she actually noticed one afternoon that Alice was crying in between patients. Didn't actually bring it up with you at the time. Another thing which the receptionist has passed on to you, that she's actually noticed that quite often Alice will actually advise the patients to be coming in and having their review visit with the supervisor rather than with themselves. So there's a few little early warning signs which we may or may not be starting to notice on this, but hopefully now that you're a bit familiar with the early warning signs, you might start to actually be looking for them a little bit. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to have a little bit of a quick random case analysis review going on with Alice, because I completely agree with Graham earlier that this is a fantastic mechanism, and we had an earlier webinar on that, which any of you who aren't familiar with random case analysis, I'd encourage you to revisit and have a look at. So there's your appointments there on the left as the supervisor on what is usually a very busy Monday morning, and there's Alice's patient listing on the right. I'm sorry if might be some of you for whom the listing isn't coming up. It's a screenshot, so I know that it works on Windows PC, but hopefully if it's not coming up on your iPads or your Macs, basically we're just illustrating that you've got a very busy morning yourself as supervisor, so you're not always going to be able to directly observe what's actually going on with your registrar at the time, but random case analysis is a great way to be able to look in afterwards. So the first of the patients that we're revisiting with Alice is young Master 5. He's a 10-year-old boy. The family are on a healthcare card. He's actually a new patient to the practice. And Mum is adamant that his cough is getting worse and that she actually wants him to have some prednisone. So you're looking through Alice's notes there, and actually I would say that she looks as though she's been reasonably thorough with all of that. To me, I'm not identifying any particular concerns about her history or examination on that. But we do think that maybe this is a bit of a mild case. It doesn't seem too bad. But so Alice has certainly gone ahead and great to hear, Chris, that it works on the Macintosh. Thanks for that. But you do see that Alice has gone ahead and advised some prednisone for a few nights. And when Alice is reflecting on this case with you, she says, look, look, his croup didn't seem too bad at the moment, but when I was in the ED, it seemed like all of the kids with any sort of croup got the prednisone. Isn't that what we do in general practice as well? The other thing that you find when you're actually spending a little bit of time talking to Alice about is that she knows that young Master 5's mum happens to actually be a good friend of the practice nurse, which may be how she got an urgent appointment on the Monday morning, but it's also another reason why Alice is a bit reluctant to be offending the mum at this particular time. Let's move on to our next one, Mrs. Struthers. Mrs. Struthers is one of our usual patients of yours, actually. She's usually your patient. She's 73-year-old, once again a pensioner on her healthcare card. She's just popped in for a flu vax today. She's never had any problems with it. She's up to date with all of her prescriptions. So Alice, being quite wise and quite savvy, decides she's going to take that opportunity to check the blood pressure. It's 168 on 105 today with a pulse rate of 74. And although Mrs. Struthers is adamant that she's still taking all of her usual medications, she's just not sure which ones they are. When she last saw you yourself, you might have been thinking that she actually might have needed some stronger doses, but she's happy to wait off onto that. Now, when you actually talk to Alice about this and say, Alice, that 168 on 105, I'd still be thinking that's a bit high. Well, we always remember that Alice might be thinking, well, actually, she's your patient, boss. I don't really know if I'm allowed to be actually making changes to what happens with you. All of a sudden you start to see that maybe another one of these early warning signs might actually be flicking away here. Let's move on to another one. We move on to Mr. Andrews. He's a very otherwise very well 58-year-old male. He's actually been quite proactive. He's come in for a general check. He hasn't actually been in for several years, but the arrival of his grandchild lately has encouraged him that he actually needs to start taking things a little bit seriously. So Alice has gone through and done quite a reasonable check there. She's been fantastic in that she's updated your patient demographics, which we had been slack and hadn't entered the alcohol details for our patient for several years. She's done a reasonable examination, and she's done a bit of a quick skin examination, but she hasn't actually gone ahead and done anything about that sort of pale, different hypopigmented lesion on the left upper arm. And when you actually go back and visit that with Alice at the random case analysis, you actually say, hey, look, if you were concerned about that, why didn't you come and get me? And Alice says, well, look, you were having a really busy morning, boss. I didn't really want to come in and interrupt you, but I am a little bit worried about that. And as she's been doing, she's been asking the registrar asking the patient to come and see the supervisor for the review visits. And of course, you take one look at it and say, hey, no, look, we've got to get an urgent biopsy for this one sorted out. So there are definitely areas where we see that there's clinical concerns coming on. We can see that there's areas where there might be personal issues or personality issues which are going on. There might even be areas which are structural or organisational which are going on. And each of these issues in isolation might not seem as though we're dealing with a registrar who's in difficulty, but it's enough to say, hey, look, we need to go on and start looking a little bit deeper about what's happening. So you actually then go on to all of this with Alice, and we say, look, we've got some concerns going on here, and I think that most of you would agree that what we're seeing here is that what might just be apparent deficits in her knowledge are becoming compounded by a lack of confidence in her own abilities, but not only in her own abilities, but in actually raising concerns with the supervisor or with other colleagues as well. Alice is already showing that she's trying to please the patients and the staff, maybe to the stage of compromising on her own skills and acumen or what she thinks might be actually the best thing to do. She's already showing that she's very reluctant to challenge or to seem to be annoying the supervisor. As it turns out, she's never actually been taught properly how to do a thorough and complete skin check. And of course, we're now compounding all of that with those underlying issues of that she's been, missing dearly her family, missing her home, missing her fiance. And when she actually starts to break down into tears and you actually start delving a little bit deeper into it, you realise, oh my gosh, this poor girl's been struggling with an anxiety disorder and she's never really brought it to anybody's attention, and she's been trying to mask it for all of this time. And how easy it is for all of a sudden to feel absolutely terrible that we were, quick to jump to judgment on things when she's been trying so hard to actually deal with things herself. So how do we actually then go ahead and develop appropriate supports for our registrar who is in difficulty? And once again, I apologise that this picture, this graphic is quite difficult to read, particularly on a smaller screen. It is reproduced directly out of the guide that we've already encouraged you to download. So please go through that. We're just going to run through the basic principles of it. If we start off thinking, consider when you've got a triggering event or triggering incident which is going on, think about the nature, the significance, and the severity of the problem. Is there actually a risk to safety which is happening? So always think about the safety of the registrar and the patients all of the time. Think about who needs to be aware. Is this something which now that you're aware of, you can actually deal with together with the supervisor? Is it something which does need to be escalated to the level of the medical educator or the training organisation? Or is this something which in fact does constitute notifiable conduct and needs to be brought to the attention of APRA or to the medical defence organisations? Is this something which actually involves systematic or organisational issues? And is it actually an area which doing some effective retraining or some proper teaching for that area might actually be enough to overcome or to assist with? And then finally, are there actually some significant underlying issues, whether they're those performance, professional, types of concerns that we're missing that actually need to be addressed before we can hope that anything is actually going to improve and get better. So this is a simple template which I would encourage all of you to use. And realistically, when you're actually using something like this, it's not all that different to the learning plans which we're already well familiar with and have been using with our registrars for years. So this is something which we would hope that you'd be able to prepare together with the registrar. It's going to work best with the registrar, and this then gives you a standardized way of being able to document what is happening, and also it gives you a way that you can leave a copy with the registrar. You can keep a copy of yourself, and it shows you where you're at. So it starts off with just those basic details of registrar name, supervisor name, who convenes the meeting, who's actually the supervisor involved. What's the purpose of the meeting? What are the issues that have been raised? What are the actions which need to be taken? What's the follow-up that's going to happen? And then for the registrar type of things, what's actually the action plan which is going to be put into place? So what do they say are the agreed outcomes? What would they expect? Who's the person responsible for achieving that? And what's the review date that we're putting in place for that? And then you've got the tick boxes down the bottom of it. Is this something that needs to go to the RTO or to APRA or in fact to the college? So it's a really great simple template which really does meet all of the requirements, and I would definitely encourage all of you to download this and maybe even just have a theoretical run through with it, so that if the time actually comes that you need to use it, it's there to go with. So what are some of the ways that we might actually come about helping out the registrar? So some of these are going to be in-house things which you can do just within your actual training practice. It might be that a registrar like Alice needs just a little bit of personal leave. Take a week off, go down home, spend a little bit of time with the family. We're still going to be here when you get back. It might be that we might need to revamp our teaching plan for the next 4 weeks and actually come up with some focused teaching sessions on areas which are of concern. It might be that they're actually getting overloaded and we need to give the registrar a slightly different booking structure or a different workload to help them out through with it. Or that perhaps, instead of actually just doing our teaching sessions on topics, we might need to use a little bit more of our allocated teaching time to actually sit in and do some direct observation with the registrar on things that they could do. Some other possibilities might come from external sources. So it might be that your registrar might actually benefit from being referred to a counsellor or to a psychologist. It might be that they actually are getting isolated, and having a good study group or spending some time networking with their peers and colleagues is all that they need. The regional training organisation might be able to develop an appropriate support program or remediation for the registrar. It might be that there is just a basic clash of personalities and that things aren't going to work with you and the registrar, but in a different training practice they might flourish, and that's certainly something which happens all the time. Never take it personally if your training provider suggests that as an option. And of course, it's the role of APRA that if notification has arisen, that they need to be able to come up with a plan and an intervention there as well, which sometimes, knowing that they've got a registrar as being adequately supervised by a senior colleague, is all that APRA might want to know. They just want to get some feedback from you as well at the actual time. So in summary, folks, we're just going to go back through that please be aware that when your registrar might be having issues, that there's going to be a multitude of factors which are going to be impacting on them that we may or may not be aware of, but hopefully now you're a little bit more aware to watch out for them. Being able to identify early signs of distress is crucial for the best outcomes for your registrar, your patients, and the practice as a whole. It is our responsibility as a supervisor to address the issues, not to pass them off and to delegate them to somebody else. if you can actually get timely and supported intervention, that really is necessary, and to get that in as early as can be appropriately placed is the way to go. And making sure that there is abundant support that you are able to get hold of. Your regional training organisation, organisations like GPSA, and that of course that the colleges, both RACGP and ACRM, have got ways to help out with these registrars as well. Michael's quite right to say that it's very difficult if the supervisor is the treating clinician, and we would definitely encourage you always to separate those roles. Please don't become the treating clinician if you can at all avoid it, but we would rather that happen than that the registrar not have a GP themselves. And Rolf, you're right that often it's never a single one of these errors or one of these factors which becomes the precipitant, but often it's when they all arise in sequence, giving us that Swiss cheese effect, that we actually see these problems arise. So we're just about there, folks. We're going to have just a quick poll, just wanting to make sure that we met tonight's objectives, which I'll just revisit for you. Did you feel that you now are able to understand potential causes of difficulty for registrars, that you know some of the ways to identify signs of difficulty, you know some of the measures to put in place to address these issues with the registrar, and you would know how, when, how and why to escalate? Wonderful, guys. Thank you very much. And as I mentioned earlier, that this is by no means a comprehensive overview of this very broad area, but I would definitely encourage you all to use the user supervisor guide that GPSA has published and released. Make sure you've got it downloaded and have a flick through that. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for all of those who've participated, and we really appreciated it. And please make sure that you do complete the evaluation, and that you're available for the next webinar. Back to you, Glenn. Thank you.
Fantastic, and congratulations, you are an absolute gun. You have met the time limit exceedingly well, with 3 minutes to go, and I won't keep you too much longer either. Suffice to say, thank you very much for presenting tonight, obviously taking time out of your busy schedule, and also for those of you that have joined us tonight as well. It's great having you here. We won't keep running them if they're not relevant, and clearly tonight's session has been very relevant to quite a large number of you. Now, the evaluation should be in your inbox right now. It's been sent out during the session, so as has been suggested, we would love to get your feedback. It's important. We do make significant changes to everything that we do in terms of the webinars each time we have a look at that feedback. And probably a really good segue from this particular presentation is that the next session is bullying and harassment, and often there is quite a difficult line between managing underperformance and registrars in difficulty and even staff for that matter. I noticed that there was a comment there by somebody from the audience saying that a number of these issues can actually be used with other staff within the practice, and that's absolutely true. And the same confounding factors of whether it's performance or whether it's whether your intervention is going to be perceived as bullying and harassment can be difficult to navigate. So we have got a skilled expert in that particular area that will be with us next month on the 24th. So please feel free to register for that. We'll get out the promotion for that very soon. Once again, I'd like to thank very much our sponsors, MDA National, for making this webinar possible, and obviously thanks again to the Australian Government for funding GPSA. We would love to be around as long as we possibly can, and we'll do that through providing relevant quality resources like the guide that you'll find in the download document folder at the bottom right, but we'll also email out the recording of this webinar, make it freely available, as well as all of the links and the guides that have been available today. Thanks very much, and without further ado, I'm going to close off tonight's session. Go and put your feet up. Thanks very much for joining us. Cheers.
Thanks all. Good night.